Hey friends, welcome back to She's At It Again. Today we're going to try a little experiment. I don't know if this is going to turn out right or not, but in my mind I'm trying to work out kind of the science end of it, which I'm not really a science person, but when it comes to food, I can kind of figure out why something's doing what it's doing in an ingredient. There are so few recipes for oyster crackers. Now, people will have saltine recipes on there. I've tried them. I have one that I use, but it's not like a store-bought saltine. It's not light and fluffy. It's kind of dense and heavy. But I want something that's going to puff up. Now, the recipe that I found for oyster crackers does not have yeast in it, but I read the ingredients on one of those bad kind of oyster crackers that has all kinds of genetically modified ingredients and TBHQ and all those preservatives in it yesterday. I'm not going to buy those because of the preservatives and things like that it has, but I want to make my own. But I noticed the ingredient list always said yeast, and it's the last ingredient, so there's a little bit of it. Normally always on an ingredient list on a food product, the ingredient that's listed first is what there is the most of. The ingredient that's listed last is what there is least of. And the entire list goes like that. So what I want to do is take a recipe that I have found on Pinterest, change it up a little bit, add yeast to it, but I have to do it in a certain way because the way you mix things in this really does matter how things turn out. So I'll show you how this is going. Let's go over to the kitchen island and let's get started on some oyster crackers. All right, here's what I'm talking about when I say it matters how you mix things and the order you put them in together. So this original recipe calls for your flour, salt, butter. Cut the butter in like you would with a pastry knife or something like that, pastry blender, and then you're going to add your water, and it calls for baking powder. Well, I want to add yeast to this, so what I want to do is activate the yeast because it originally calls for cold water. Cold water is not going to activate my yeast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my amount of water they call for. I'm going to add honey to it so the yeast can have something to eat. Then add the yeast to it. So we're going to get our yeast activated. Then once it starts getting active, we're going to chill it. Then it'll be cold when we add it to our flour and butter later on. But this is going to take a few steps. So I have 1/3 of a cup of, this is just warm water. It's not hot, but it's warm enough to where it will activate the yeast. So about 110 to 115 is a good temperature for that. I'm going to get about 1/2 teaspoon of honey, not too much in there. I just want enough to feed the yeast, not necessarily to sweeten this or add a different flavor to it. I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of yeast. I just want it to be bubbly and puffy. I don't want it to be dense and flat. These oyster crackers are going to go on some Cincinnati chili or three-way chili, whatever you want to call it, and we will link the recipe to that, but this is in lieu of me going to the store and buying them. I can't find organic oyster crackers anywhere. I could go to Big Lots and find them. Freakishly enough, they would have them there. They always surprise me at what they have. But I cannot find oyster crackers. Now I can find organic saltines, and they're $6 a package at the store. I'm sorry. That's just a little more than what I want to do because everybody's like, hey, crackers, and they just sit around munching on them. I'll go, no. It's too expensive. So we're going to see if we can make these. Hopefully these turn out great. I'll be the second YouTube video on YouTube to be showing how to make oyster crackers because there's nothing out there. You enter in, you put in the search engine oyster crackers and it comes up with a recipe for taking store-bought oyster crackers and adding dry ranch dressing mix to it. That's not a recipe. That's just instructions on how to throw stuff together. Anyway, but I wanted a recipe for oyster crackers and I'm not finding it. All right, so what we're going to do is let this get active. We'll let it sit here a while, and I'll come back in a bit after I've activated this. Then I'm going to put it in the refrigerator to chill. So it'll basically be taking a nap at that point. Once we let these rise, we add our flour and stuff to it, then it'll kind of wake up again when it comes to a room temperature. But I'll show you that process. I know it sounds kind of confusing now, and in my mind I'm still trying to work it out. So this may not turn out even worth messing with. And if it doesn't turn out well, you will never know that I even tried to make these. So we'll see what we're in for. So we're going to let this sit here a while, and then I'll take this and put it in the refrigerator after it gets all activated and bubbly, and let it chill. And then we'll come back and we'll be mixing our flour, salt, and butter. Then we'll add this to it and go from there. We'll still have another rise period, but we'll do that next. Okay, moving right along. We have a cup of flour, just plain flour in this bowl. I'm going to add a teaspoon of salt. I think I'm going to add a little bit more because I'm not going to sprinkle salt on top of those. Maybe just 1/4 teaspoon in addition to that. And then I'm going to take 2 tablespoons of butter. Cut it into small pieces. Idea behind this part is kind of like when you're making a pie crust, you would never add water directly to your flour, then add your butter. What you're going to do is incorporate your butter and flour together before you ever add your cold liquid in, because you want to make those little pockets in there. Little pockets of fat in the flour. Now I'm just taking the back of my fork and just pressing this down. That's all in the world I'm doing. You could use your fingers. You could take each individual little piece of butter and kind of press it like that. Keep adding flour to it, and it's going to do the same thing. In fact, I think I'll use that technique on this. My hands are a little bit warm. I've been out in the sunroom ironing, and today it's actually warm. It's so pleasant outside. Well, I say pleasant. It's hot in the sunroom, so I had to turn the fan on. But I'm not going to complain about the heat because it's been too cold for too long. Okay, so when you take this flour and you push it between your fingers like that and make little thin strips of flour. Let me see if I can get this closer to the camera and show you what I'm talking about. So you're going to take your fingers and just kind of push them apart and slide them across like that and let that fat fall off. That'll be coated in flour, and just keep picking those up and doing the same thing. All you're doing is just pushing them between your fingers and making larger surfaces. Then they'll kind of fall apart when the flour coats them. So from this point, it's going to be similar to making a pie crust in that we're cutting this butter into our flour, and then because I have my water with the yeast activated in it, it has water, water, honey, and yeast that has activated. I've got that chilling, so the yeast is kind of asleep right now, but will wake up when it warms up. And it's similar to making a pie crust. I'm just trying to play around with these techniques. I don't know how these big manufacturers get their oyster crackers so puffy, but I'm going to do my best to figure it out. I may be making these things 20 times before I figure it out, but hopefully, eventually I'll figure it out. Okay, try to get as much of this incorporated as you can, leaving very few big pieces. If you think you got a big piece in there, shake your bowl and the big pieces should come to the top. It's kind of like panning for gold or something. Those big lumps of butter will come to the top. All right, see if I can get most of this off my fingers. We're going to pour our water in there now. And this is what our yeast looks like in the cup. Kind of that little foamy top on there. So I'm going to make a well in the center. Make sure our honey is stirred up nicely in there. I don't want anything left in the cup. And then just like with a pie crust, we're going to work this in. Really, the difference is that dry yeast that we put in there earlier. But I'm wanting the puffiness from it. That's all I want, is just puffy. Just give me the puffy. I can make flat crackers all day long. All right, I'm going to get this mixed up, and I'm going to let this rest. I'm going to get a cover and put on this bowl and let this rest while I fix some lunch and eat real quick. And then by that time it should be risen just a little bit. I'm going to put it out in the sunroom, and it'll be warmer out there. So I'm just going to feel so smart if this works. I don't know why. I was watching the one video on YouTube that talked about making oyster crackers, and he was using a little circle cutter from a tip that you use to decorate cakes with, and it just looked like it was taking so long. I thought, oh, he's really wanting those oyster crackers a lot worse than I am. Although I do want them. I wish I could find organic ones around, but I just can't. But sadly enough, the ingredients aren't just a little bit sketchy. They're just really sketchy on the ones that I'm seeing in stores. Okay, and to knead this is perfectly fine. You don't have to be gentle with it like a pie crust and not knead it any more than you have to, because this has yeast in it. You're going to actually need that gluten to be built up. So, okay, so this is what our dough looks like. It's stretchy, but it's not relaxed enough right now. So again, we're going to cover this, put this in a warm spot. It will not only relax, but it will also rise a bit. Then we'll cut these out, put them on a baking sheet lined with parchment. We'll let them rise again, and then we'll bake them off. So, all right, we'll cover these up, but I'm going to let them rise a while, and we'll be back. I'll let you know about how much time has passed since we put them out there. So, be back in a minute. We are back in the kitchen, and this has been out in the sunroom. I can't tell that it's risen any at all, if it has, but it's pretty soft, I will say that. Has a lot of moisture to it, so maybe I shouldn't have put quite that much water in it. I don't know. I think I put just a little over a third of a cup. Maybe I should have believed them when they said a third of a cup and just left it at that. All right, we'll put our flour down, and that is sure soft. So all we're going to do is just roll this out in the directions on the recipe that I saw on Pinterest. It said roll it out to about 1/8 of an inch. So we roll it out then. I do not want that to stick to the countertop, that's for sure. So you have to constantly make sure all the sticky areas are coated in flour. This dough is so much easier to handle when you let it rest. If nothing else, if you've ever watched any of my videos about bread products, if you didn't learn a single thing other than let the dough rest, then mission accomplished. It's just incredible how much easier it is to roll out and it stay where you roll it out, because otherwise it just draws back up. You know, you roll it out kind of like squishing a gummy bear, and you let go of it and goes back to its original shape. Not that I'm a gummy bear expert, but somebody used that analogy the other day, and I thought, that's exactly what it's like. It's like a gummy bear. It just misbehaves. So defiant. So when you let it rest and it absorbs all that liquid, it just makes it so much easier to work with. All right, I'm thinking that'll give you an idea right there how thin that is. Make sure that's not sticking at all. You can always add more flour to it. I don't want an overabundance of flour. I don't want them to bake and have flour resting on the surface necessarily. All right. I'm thinking these might perhaps rise a little bit more once we put them on the baking sheet and they rest for a while. So, or puff, I should say puff up. I think they'll puff up more, hopefully. That's what I'm hoping for. And this is just a pizza cutter if you're wondering what I'm using to cut this with. But I honestly can't remember the last time I cut a pizza with this. I always would use one of my big sharp giant knives to cut a pizza with. This should be renamed a pastry cutter. I want to try to get these as close to square as I can, but I don't know how I'll accomplish that. The part that'll take up as much time as anything will be putting these on the baking sheet. This may take 2 baking sheets. They say to leave a little room in between each one, I guess, so they won't stick together, but if we leave a little room, it may take 2 baking sheets instead of just 1. All right, got that. I just don't want to overlap them because I want them to all brown as evenly as they can. But again, we're going to allow these to rise in a warm place for I don't know how long. Now the first time we left them in that bowl, we left them out in the sunroom, it was about an hour and 15 minutes. As I looked at the clock and thought, okay. I told my friends I'd tell them how long it was, so it was about an hour and 15 minutes. Okay, I'm going to get another baking sheet and fill this up. We'll be back after I let these rise, and you can see if they puffed up any, so fingers crossed. All right, we're ready to put these in the oven, and this is what they look like. I wouldn't necessarily say they're incredibly puffy, but they're a little bit puffier than they were when I rolled them out. So we're going to put these in the oven. We're going to bake these for 15 minutes, and then I'm going to turn the oven off, prop the door open, and just let it cool down for another 20 minutes. So that's what we're about to do. We have 2 pans of these. Okay, so we'll be back and let you see the final product in just a bit. Okay, our oyster crackers have cooled off. I left the door propped open. I actually went and walked the dogs, came back, cooled them down a little bit more, and to be honest with you, these are actually better than store-bought. They don't necessarily look better, but they puffed up a little bit. I have to be honest, they didn't puff up as much as I necessarily wanted them to, but between the butter and the salt in there, these are perfection. They're so good. They're super crunchy, and these are going to be fabulous on my bowl of Cincinnati chili. So I'm going to put these in a jar, keep them airtight, and I'll serve that in the next few days. But we will link the recipe for the Greek chili or Cincinnati chili in the description of this. And as always, the recipe for this is included in the bottom of this, the bottom of your screen. Click on the link or whatever you do. You know how to find it. I did good to put it on there, but you know how to find it. But I'm so excited. Seriously, there is only one video that I saw for oyster crackers on YouTube. So we're number 2. But as far as I'm concerned, as far as the flavor, this is probably number 1. The other one didn't have yeast in it. I have a feeling this might be the key to it, but the butter is so good. So hope you give this a try. And as always, we look forward to sharing something again with you real soon. Thanks for joining us. Bye.